The scripture I've chosen for today comes from Matthew 5, verses 38 through 42. You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who would want to borrow. It's been said that we teach best what we need to learn most. If that's true, this is going to be one of the best sermons I ever deliver in my life. The same movie that brought us this quote also brought us the thought, which could also be a valid point right now, that God once spoke through the mouth of an ass, and perhaps he's about to do so again. In the Old Testament law, it says in Leviticus 24:19 through 20, anyone who injures another person must be dealt with according to the injury inflicted, fracture for fracture, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Whatever anyone does to injure another person must be paid back in kind. That seems pretty fair, right? But this law, however fair it may be, can be and was abused. For example, many times when someone wronged another, the victim might punish the crime out of revenge. It started this whole, you're going to pay for that. You hurt me, I'll get you back mentality. Which, if you haven't come to this conclusion yet already on your own, I'm praying for you, because that is wrong. And hold on to this thought for a moment as we consider Paul, who told the Corinthians that they needed to understand the basics before he could explain some deeper concepts. In 1 Corinthians 3, he makes the analogy of the spiritual life to the physical life and saying, dear brothers and sisters, when I was with you, I could not talk to you as I would to spiritual people. I had to talk as though you belonged to this world, or as though you were infants in the Christian life. I had fed you with milk, not with solid food, because you weren't ready for anything stronger. When you're an infant, you're fed milk, because that's what your body can handle. Then later, as you mature, you start having meat, because your body needs a little more substance to survive. Just as the physical life needs to mature, the spiritual life also needs to mature. The law of Moses was the milk for the Hebrews to help them grow and be right with God. There comes a time when milk is no longer sufficient. Don't get me wrong. Milk is always good for you. I drink milk every day, but there comes a time when you have to add meat to your diet. For example, if you've ever seen the movie Grown Ups, you might remember that one of the characters had a son who was 4 years old and refused to eat or drink anything but breast milk. Consequently, the kid was a little messed up, to say the least. In the scripture for this sermon, Jesus is giving the Jews that meat that was so long overdue. For nearly 1,500 years, they had had nothing but the law. Up until that point, since they had abandoned the law and then returned to it so frequently, the law of Moses was all that they needed. But when Jesus comes to the scene, they had been in the law for over 400 years, and it was starting to be not enough to sustain them. Sort of like what that 4-year-old, the Jews were a little messed up. They had taken the law, which was just, and had turned it into self-justified revenge, which just isn't right. So Jesus said, remember this rule from Leviticus 24? See how basic it is? Here, let me give you some meat to go with it, some substance. You've had the milk, now I'm going to give you the good stuff. If someone hits you, rather than hit back, invite them to strike again. A few verses before this, Jesus says, don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. In other words, I haven't come to get rid of the law just to give you some meat to go with them. This turning the other cheek business is the meat, and let me tell you, it's pretty good stuff. Seems like a minor detail, but have any of us noticed that Jesus specifies that it was the right cheek? If you think about it, when a person slaps another, they will always strike the left cheek, because when you go to slap somebody, your hand immediately comes in contact with the left side of their face. And to hit somebody on the right side of the cheek, the right cheek, you have 2 options. One is to hit them with your left hand. In the culture Jesus spoke to, anything done with the left hand had an evil connotation to it. For example, Jesus is pictured as being at the right hand of the Father, rather than the left, because the right is a place of honor. In fact, when Jesus talks about the sheep and the goats, he says all the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at his right and the goats at his left. Then the king will turn to those on his left and say, "Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons." Why does Jesus specify that the people who were cursed were placed on the left? Because in that culture, that there was an implied significance of the left being for the evil. Sort of like today, at least in a lot of places, the west side is where the less desirables live and hang out. Think of the musical West Side Story. No offense to anyone who here that may live on the west side, but that's the stereotype, whether it's true or not. For that reason, gestures with the left hand were avoided at any cost by Jews in that day. So when Jesus mentions the right cheek being struck, his audience would have understood that the person was smacked with the back of the hand, because when you smack with the back of the hand, you hit them on the left side of their face, because of the way the motion of the strike is changed. Backhanding someone was not necessarily to hurt them like a forehanded smack or a punch, but merely to insult them. It was just demeaning and belittling of the victim. Alright, so what does that matter? Let me explain with this illustration. A timid, studious young man named Johnny was walking down the hallway of his school, trying to snake his way through the crowd to his next class. Then along comes Lars, a bully who's been torturing young freshmen like Johnny the whole school year, and Lars knocks the books from Johnny's arms to the floor. Fed up with Lars, Johnny said, "Hey, knock me to the ground too. If you're going to torture me, it's going to be on my terms. I don't care what you do to me, but you have to know that I'm in charge of myself, not you." Do you see how that is much more effective than hitting back? Rather than doing to them the same wrong they did to you, you expose them as being wrong and keep yourself out of trouble and take charge and show that you're not this helpless, weak individual. What Johnny said to Lars is about what in Jesus' time and culture would have been implied simply by the act of turning the other cheek. See, the natural reaction a person has is to hit back. That's what makes the law the milk. It's natural. This business that Jesus is talking about is better. It's the meat. But no one having the choice between a steak and a glass of milk would choose one over the other. If you take the milk, you're left hungry. But if you take the steak, you're left with food and nothing to wash it down. So Jesus didn't come to get rid of the milk, but to satisfy the hunger left by only having milk. When you turn the other cheek, you make the other person realize they're wrong, which is better than trying to prove it to them through retaliation. So I'll leave you with this challenge. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Is that getting you anywhere? Try just not hitting back at all. If someone strikes you, stand there and take it voluntarily, in total control of the situation. If someone drags you to court and sues you for the shirt off your back, be loving and give him your best coat as an additional gift, since they might just need it more than you do anyway. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life, since that is what Jesus has called us to do. Serve. No more of this tit-for-tat stuff that doesn't do anything but leave us fighting amongst ourselves. Live generously, and God bless.